Hi, folks. Welcome to a very unusual occasion, a Saturday paper roundup by the iWrite radio podcast stroke videocast. There's just been so much in the papers, and there are moves afoot within the Labour Party. Ruthie's thrown a wee wobbly. So we thought we'd better stick our oar in, basically. So we're just going to do a round robin. And let everybody have a chance to talk about what caught their eye in the mainstream media and at least one blog, if not more. Well, Stuart, we'll start with you. What's your principal gripe today?
All of them, but I'll start with Tom Gordon. He's not. He is the political man at the Herald, and his job is to savage the Yes campaign. We know that. The fact that we don't like him doesn't mean to say we've got to ignore him. He did win for Journalist of the Year, so his peers in Scotland voted for him. What he does is sum up the position that a lot of people within the Yes community have been discussing is, what are the chances of Boris Johnson saying yes to a Section 30 and allowing a referendum to go ahead? His arguments are basically, he doesn't think, well, you could say he's writing from a position of, I don't want this independence thing to get any further forward positively. So he's attacking the idea that what was published in the programme for government last week by the First Minister has any legs, and he kind of pulls it apart by saying it's not positive enough, it's not clear enough, and it's also not going to change Boris's mind.
Jimmy?
Yeah, I agree to an extent that, but it's somewhat political suicide for Boris to ever agree to Section 30. The only caveat I'd put on it is just how much what you might call anti-indie opinion that kind of goes along with the idea that it is untenable for him also to refuse it. I mean, we've seen in the past that it's not untenable for them to refuse it, they just say no. But if they do get thumped in an election, yet another election that explicitly states that Scotland wishes to have a referendum, at the moment they're pushing opinion towards yes by saying no. How far do they want to push it? Do they want to push it into the 60s and keep saying no, England says you can't have a referendum, even though the Irish can have one whenever they want? You know, but we're no Irish, we're Scottish, we're different, we're going to be treated differently, and you guys can't have a referendum because we say no.
I think what's been ignored by most of the unionist press on this is the fact that by continually saying no to Scotland, you're saying no to Ireland and you're saying no to Wales. You're also saying no to your own nationalists in England. Now, there's a growing call for English exceptionalism to be made, or shall we say, solid. There is a movement in England for English independence, and part of that is based on this "we subsidise Scotland" story. So,
because they all believe that.
I mean, that creates a problem for him as well. By saying no to us, he's shackling England to Scotland. Not necessarily Scotland to England.
There is another side to it as well that Tom Gordon doesn't mention at all, of course. I mean, we've got another example of it this morning with the confirmation of Tony Abbott, the Australian right-winger appointed to the government here. There is this creeping sense of a right-wing coup going on here in London, and there is that background which he doesn't even count into as Tom Gordon's article, which obviously must colour some opinions in Scotland.
Yeah, I think exactly. You're looking at an ex-Australian Prime Minister who was kind of removed by his own party because he's a disgrace of a man. And his opinion appears to matter more than the democratically elected Parliament of Scotland. Well, that doesn't play well up here, does it?
But I mean, I actually think that the majority of Scots who follow politics That's not to say that the majority of Scots do follow politics, but those that do are well aware of the right-wing element that's leading the UK at the moment. And I don't think the Tony Abbott thing really does anything but just underline it.
Well, I'm not saying it. I'm not making. I'm not exaggerating it. It's just that I feel like Tom Gordon should have included that in his article. Something not Tony Abbott, but the right-wing coup.
Yeah, I just see them pushing more and more people towards independence with every action that they take. I mean, we've seen polls where a vast majority of people now see Holyrood as the legitimate government of Scotland, not London. But we're also seeing, on a daily basis, remarkable incompetence from London. And it's juxtaposed by massively high belief in Scotland that Nicola Sturgeon is a world statesman and has handled everything in the last year pretty much perfectly. Even the problems that she's had, she's handled pretty well.
Well, don't forget, I think you had it up behind you the other day, Norrie, the 63% of people in Scotland believe that there will be another referendum and that it will be won by the Yes campaign.
Well, we brought up referendum, who I can't actually even remember whose piece it was that was following Kenny McCaskill's. It was Peter A. Bell's blog, wasn't it? Talking about lack of preparation for an Indie Ref 2 by the SNP. I listened to Radio 4 this morning, and Andrew Wilson was on with, is it Ronald McDonald?
Aye.
The guy from Glasgow.
All right.
And one of the questions was, how are you going to pay the deficit, blah, blah, blah. How are you going to manage? And, the usual light-hearted almost point was put, it'll be a different place. Andrew Wilson needs to actually say in a situation like that, well, we won't be paying for HS2, we won't be paying for Trident, we won't be paying for Crossrail, we won't be paying for the sewerage works across London. We'll only pay for stuff in Scotland. All our civil servants will be based in Scotland, paying tax in Scotland. Our whole infrastructure, all the wages the government pay, there'll be money coming back. They really need to start pointing out that the UK costs Scotland money.
Look, Norrie, I would go stronger than that. I think they've got to dump Andrew Wilson. He's got a very weak economic argument now in the face of attacks like that. They really need to bring in and talk to the likes of Steve Keane and Richard Murphy and all the alternatives.
Well, they're not going to get on Radio 4.
The BBC when he talked to them. So I was just going to say the BBC when he talked to them, because that's not a debate that the BBC wants to air. They don't want to be giving Scots the information that people like Richard Murphy want to give Scots. They still want to be able to attack us by having that weak economic argument, because it's going to be a central tenet of the argument in any Indie Ref is going to be the Growth Commission. Even though the Growth Commission is so far out of date, it should really be sharing a taxi with Kenny McCaskill to a retirement home.
The trouble with the Growth Commission is, as far as we know, it represents the Charlotte Street Partners. Angus Grosser and his pals.
Well,
yeah, and the trouble with that is that Nicola Sturgeon has allowed that because she wants to woo that particular part of the economic.
Well, they need
allowed that to become our position.
They need the sound bites. They need that way of saying, look, in an independent Scotland, none of the tax for, and just name the areas. There's no income generated in Scotland through tax for X, Y, Z, and we pay a portion of that. Why isn't the 10% that we pay for put on our books as income? They need to find a short, sharp way of forcing that.
Okay, well, but just to finish my argument about, let's say, Charlotte Street. It seems to me that the scales in the relationship between the head of the Scottish Government, the SNP in particular, and the, shall we say, the financial elite, existing elite in Scotland, they're not balanced very well at the moment. Yes, we risk huge risks in a way. There's Grangemouth and Jim Ratcliffe, you know, the biggest single business in Scotland, and he waves that over, I'll shut it down if you don't do what I say. There is that kind of threat from these kind of people, I'm sure, in the background.
Yeah, but they are actually looking to deal with that. They've already got work in progress to look at Grangemouth.
Well, that's the problem. Because we're not an independent country, we can't threaten them back and say, listen, Mr. Ratcliffe, you shut it down all you want. We'll nationalise.
It's part of the Green Deal.
I like the way you put that, Jimmy.
But I mean, they're not blind to it. It's part of the Green Deal. They're looking at the areas that have nuclear power, what will we call it? Black power, in the sense of oil and coal and so on. They're looking at ways not to leave these areas behind when we move into a greener energy.
We discussed, I mentioned, was it Baillie Gifford the other day in a slightly different aspect, but we discovered that Baillie Gifford, a huge investor, £20 billion worth of investments, are the major investor in Tesla. Now there's a green company.
Yeah, but that's the point I'm making. There are already things happening. Whether they'll happen quickly enough and whether they'll succeed is a whole different issue. But
Elon Musk,
it's on the agenda.
Elon Musk should be coming over here and having serious discussions, given that Scotland has almost limitless access, depending on how we invest, but almost limitless access to power in terms of wave generation and underwater turbines. And we could do a heck of a deal with him to have his battery technology getting very, very cheap supplies of that limitless power, so he can test all his batteries and find out. I mean, the ideal for Tesla is to have batteries that run these cars 400 miles and they'll charge up in a couple of hours. A fabulous test bed Scotland could be, and say, by the way, there's some free electricity, build yourself a big factory on the west coast and we'll build all the turbines underwater for it.
The batteries, he's not just selling batteries to go in cars. Without mentioning any names, I was looking at a brand new solar panel installation last week, and the batteries that got installed as backup, they're all Tesla batteries.
Aye. You'll be running your house off Tesla batteries in a few years, depending on how quickly it develops.
We ran the radio station. When we did Leith FM, we actually ran the transmitter off batteries, and that was a technology, a 30-year-old technology. The mains was only there to top up the batteries. 30 years on, the technology now is completely different. It's all computer controlled. You sit there with your smartphone looking at what's happening. Oh, look, it's all coming off the sun today. We're not paying a penny. In fact, we're getting 5p a unit back for every.
Aye, but we didn't have the freedom.
Coming off the roof.
But we didn't even have the freedom to approach Elon Musk now, because the National Grid would say, no, we're not dealing. If you're going to deal with Elon Musk, we'll deal with him, no you.
The national grid, the broad shoulders of the UK that charges the people that actually make the power and feed it into the national grid more to use it than the people down south who are nowhere near it.
They get a subsidy to use it down south, and we have to pay to get it on the grid. Oh no.
Exactly.
Okay.
There's a million myriad ways in which Scotland, with, like we've said before, small changes. You just turn round to Jim Ratcliffe and say, by the way, you're not in charge anymore. You want to operate in Scotland, you operate under our conditions or beat it.
Bolt, and we're taking your company and all its infrastructure into government control.
Aye, and see these 3,000 workers that you've got at Grangemouth that you keep threatening. We'll not threaten them in that way. They'll be happy to work for us.
The trouble is, we'd end up like Venezuela, attacked by the big money oligarchs all around the world, wouldn't we?
Well, we'll go and dig up Trump's golf course then.
The big money oligarchs for Eastern Europe and China and every country that isn't America would quite happily step into any battle we had with the likes of Jim Ratcliffe.
What, did you just mention Trump's golf course there, Norrie? I just had a vision of a radical farmer driving a big plough right across it.
Guys, we've just spent nearly 15 minutes on one issue. Jimmy, pick a paper.
Well, I wanted to have a wee pop at Kevin McKenna's piece this morning, where he was, again, it's about Labour's travails, and he hinted back to this leaked document that was looking into trying to win back the Roman Catholic vote in Scotland to try and help Labour in some way. I find it quite odd and slightly off kilter. I'm quite impressed with some of McKenna's output, but it's like a roller coaster. It's up and down, and this one is a down for me. I mean, you just can't refer to Scotland's Roman Catholic community as a homogenous group in the way that you could. You almost could talk about their vote in that manner up to maybe
50s, 60s.
I think maybe the 80s, mate. I think Tony Blair, although he was a Catholic himself, really annoyed a lot of Catholics in Scotland in particular, because he took the Labour Party in a direction that they just couldn't go. I mean, there are certain, Kevin McKenna in his piece, he talks about them as if they're all pro-life, as if they're all, they all hold distinct positions, and they don't. But Blair in particular took them to the right in such a way that it wasn't just Roman Catholics that he was annoying. He was annoying the entire Labour vote, and Kevin McKenna seems to miss that completely in his piece.
I mean, Stuart, you made a good point about the days of the church dictating to church members how they voted, what they should support and shouldn't support.
Of course there is. I mean, we just think of the scandal about the priests, but also throw into the picture what the situation is. The situation with, say, the Catholic Church and or the DUP and the strict Presbyterians. They're united in their anti-woke position, which is a position that Kevin McKenna flags up as a reason why people wouldn't vote for the SNP.
I mean, Kevin, he's got a serious point. I mean, if 700,000 Catholics are all pro-life, there is nowhere for them to go now. There's no pro-life party in Scotland that will stand on that platform. Nobody, including the Tories.
But
he does have a genuine, if you like, complaint.
Aye, but even him using that number, a lot of fans of Scottish culture will remember Chris Brookmeyer, the writer, and he done a book, Boiling a Frog, that was kind of not all about this kind of thing, but it was about lobbyists and churches, both sides, by the way, just treating their voters as if they were that one big group, and that they could use them as a battering ram to, in some way, shape policy. And you just can't. Apart from anything else, it specifically used that term, which is, I wonder why Kevin McKenna's used it. Scotland's 700,000 Roman Catholics. And then somebody in the book, and it wouldn't be difficult to do in real life, absolutely destroyed that number by saying, right, so you're saying there are 700,000 Roman Catholics in Scotland. Let's see how many of them go to church. Let's see how many of them go to church on a regular basis. And then let's try and work out what percentage of that would actually be swayed by the priest or the minister standing in the pulpit and telling them to vote for a particular party. It's a nonsense argument.
I do find it quite strange that he seems to be arguing against a secular political system.
I think that's one of the big pluses since devolution, is just quite how little influence the churches. I mean, you ken me, I didn't believe, but there's very little influence of the churches on policy, and I'm delighted by that. They have an input, and there's always a case for taking a moral look at some of the policies that you're enacting. But morality isn't everything. If morality was everything, then the police phoning an insurance company to stop a boy trying to give people a clean experience in the back of his van to take drugs would be acceptable. And frankly, having seen that story in the Record yesterday, that's not acceptable. The boy's broken any laws, so why are Police Scotland interfering with what he's doing?
Well, as I said on social media, the police that were involved in the 1980s here in Edinburgh went on camera in a documentary last year and admitted they were waiting outside a safer drugs paraphernalia clinic and hospital and taking the clean needles off of addicts.
Aye,
and they actually caused the spread of AIDS.
They admitted 30 odd years later that that was the wrong thing to do. So if it was the wrong thing to do in the 80s, it's certainly the wrong thing to do this year, 2020, isn't it?
I'm sorry, guys. I had to have a wee smile to myself on that one.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, now there is a bit of clever policing, because there would have been people screaming and shouting at them for letting him do it. They didn't have to arrest him. They just went to the insurance company and said, you do realize you might be enabling law breaking by giving this guy his insurance.
I think they've way overstepped the mark. It's not their place.
Jimmy, the guy was going to do was going to break the law. They would have had to arrest him.
Well, at that point, they've got to catch him. That makes them the thought police then. He's thinking about doing that. He's not done it yet.
No, I'm saying the minute he started operating, because he would have been breaking the law, they would have had to arrest him. So they've avoided having to jail the guy. And okay, I'm not disagreeing that what the guy was trying to do was a good thing. I'm talking about the position. I mean, if the police ignore the law on that, what else do you expect them to ignore the law on?
That's a good point. But if the police decide to make moral judgments, do we go back to the point where, mind that freak show that used to run Greater Manchester, James Anderton? Do we go back to that, where he was basically saying that he policed on his conversations with Jesus Christ and God when he spoke to him every evening?
Well, the police have a crime prevention department.
Mm-hmm.
And they teach you, they show you how to put locks on your windows and all the rest of it.
Prevention's a great idea, but in this
which is what they've done here.
But they're making a moral judgment.
Leave the police alone.
Well, no, I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, but we've only got a limited amount of time today. So
we're criticising them for doing their job here, because we don't think the law that would have had to apply is a good law.
Aye, and there are many, many laws, Norrie. When you ask which laws I want them to ignore, there are many laws that they ignore every single day.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. But this one,
every minute of every day in this country, and they didn't phone their insurance company to say, by the way, that boy Jimmy drives a bit fast in his taxi. You should maybe cancel his insurance because we've not caught him driving fast, but he's going to drive fast tomorrow.
Okay, never mind, because. Well, I've made my point. You're right. I do think this is slightly different in the sense that the Tories would have been screaming from the battlements about this guy flouting the law. What are the police doing about it?
As long as it's not Baroness Ruth, because you're not allowed to call her that. If she's going to scream for the battlements, you can call her Rape Clause Ruth at the battlements, but you can't call her Baroness. Well,
which brings us neatly onto the piece I wanted to highlight. Apparently, Ruth has complained to the BBC about being referred to as the Baroness because she doesn't feel that's the message the Tories want to project. The fact it's the truth doesn't seem to be relevant. It's not the spin they need for the next election.
Well, she's got two mitigating points in the article, which is, by the way, is labelled as a scoop, as they used to call them, which means somebody phoned up Hannah Rogers to tell her this story. Mm-hmm. Anyway, apparently we discovered, of course, of this little Brian Taylor and Ruth Davidson apparently are mates.
They're both Ruth's an ex-journalist, so they're both journalists. They probably
Ruth would have been the T-boy. Ruth would have been Brian's T-boy back in the day before she got into politics.
Aye, she probably polished his shoes for him.
And at the moment, she won't be Baroness until she resigns. Well, she won't be back. She doesn't need to be Baroness until after the May election. So as far as she's concerned, she's told the BBC, "Don't call me Baroness."
It's interesting how they're worried about how it's not the visual, not the image that they want to project.
That's what they're worried about. They're worried about the fact that a Tory party that supports the Lords has an ex-leader going into the Lords, and that doesn't look good to the Scots.
Mm-hmm.
I have to throw in the fact that Ross Cahoon, who SNP's communications director, and he came from National Collective, a young man with the eye on the ear of the youth, shall we say. He tweeted that, you know what to do, boys, on the story about the Baroness. You know what to do.
Do you think that'll be classed as a pylon, Jimmy?
Possibly, mate, but I think the pylon usually happens every Wednesday or Thursday whenever FMQs is on, because there's not a chance that Miss Sturgeon is going to stop throwing ermine robes and the title Baroness in Ruth Davidson's face. And the fact that it annoys her just means that Nicola will do it all the more. I think she'll do it for 3 of the 4 questions instead of just 2 like she did this week.
I've just had do you remember when they called Margaret Thatcher the Iron Lady? We could start calling Ruth the Ermine Lady.
Oh,
I like that one, aye.
Do you think that'll ring?
Mm-hmm. Aye, I quite like that one, mate. That works for me. Let's be honest, there's an awful lot of things you can call Ruth.
Sure.
Let me quote Miss Sturgeon. Ruth Davidson is heading to an unelected chamber, but has the brass neck to lecture the rest of us about scrutiny and accountability. No ermine robe in the world will cover up that hypocrisy. We'll hear that again.
Time to move on to our favourite political party in Scotland, or no, used to be favourite political party in Scotland. Richard Leonard is getting a severe kicking from his own side at the moment. There's been various articles, the Times, the Herald, the Nationals, they've all run pieces on this. But it's now spilled over the border and ended up both in the House of Lords and the Commons. Rachel Reeves telling him to go. Lord George Robertson of everybody's going to bomb Scotland after we become independent fame. What was he said? Was it something about we'd get nuked? I can't remember. It was so ridiculous. But I'm pretty certain that Richard Leonard will be a goner. Certainly before Christmas.
So we've got a split in the Labour Party in Scotland, or British Labour in Scotland, as it's also officially known. But they don't actually, not even register as a political party in Scotland, are they?
No. It's the British Labour Party.
But I'm going to throw it into the mix. Here's a split in the Labour Party in Scotland, but it's not a split between the pro-Indie part of the Labour Party in Scotland. You know, as far as we know, 40% of Labour voters in Scotland will vote for independence, but that's what they need to be discussing, not whether you go for left or right, or their version of left or right is pink or red, I suppose you would call it.
Jimmy, you're from the left of the party.
Yes, I think I'm not so sure as you that he'll be gone quite so quickly, mate. I think he's clung on to various positions for a long time. He's been a union official for years, and these guys can how to hang on to their jobs. For a start, he knows the rules of the party. I think it's very difficult to remove a sitting leader of the Scottish Labour Party. I don't know that there's been suggestions in the press, for example, that 5 MSPs could trigger a leadership election. I don't think that's the case. I think it would have to go to conference. I think it might have to actually go to the National Party's conference as well if there was a major problem about it. And I don't know, mate. I do love seeing hamsters fighting in a bag, but I think that this one might run and run and run all the way through next year's election. It could push them under 10% if they keep fighting amongst themselves.
It's
and at
interesting.
The end of that, Richard would go, but it'd be interesting to see. They're meeting a day to decide how their candidates are going to be ranked on the list. And it could be that this is what it's all about, because the likes of Jackie Baillie, for example, looks certain, I would say, to lose West Dunbartonshire next year. I think she's only got about 160 majority, and so far I've seen about 3 people standing for the SNP candidacy, all of whom look very much like they would beat her.
So she needs a list position to stay in the Parliament.
I was interested that neither Starmer nor Bailey have opened their mouth about this. They've neither come out to support or denigrate him. And that silence speaks volumes.
No, I think Starmer came out and kind of backed him midweek, but it was interesting that Rachel Reeves came out yesterday and had a pop because she's pretty close to Keir Starmer.
Well, I think he's gone. I mean, I think he's gone whether he goes or not. His authority is fatally undermined.
I didn't think he's if we look dispassionately at it, and to be honest, we're all a wee bit dispassionate because it just gives us a bit of a giggle. But if we look dispassionately at it, he should go. He's a terrible leader. He performs awfully in Parliament. But then you take a look at the people lining up to be Scottish Labour leader, and they're all pretty bad performers in Parliament as well. So whoever replaces him isn't necessarily going to make much of a difference.
If I was a member of the Labour Party, I'm pretty sure I'd go for Jackie Baillie. She's been the best performer at the dispatch box, and she does well in interviews. She's just got a far better looking.
I would say she's got easily the best mind. Easily the best mind. When you look at when she stood in as a temporary leader, she done relatively well. Yeah. But she's forensic in her questioning. She knows that if you keep asking the awkward questions, you actually do well. Richard Leonard's daft enough. He'll ask an awkward question and ask her something nice so that he gets patted by Nicola Sturgeon instead of savaged. And the next time, she doesn't care if people attempt to savage her. She's quite happy at that point. She's got thick skin, far thicker than anybody else in that party. I mean, I'd love them to elect Anis Sarwar. I would love them to do it because
he would put his foot in it very quick. He'd do it eloquently, but he would put his foot in it. Mm. He's not fast on his feet.
He's just not quick enough, no. And he's very thin-skinned as well. You can see that by the way that
he doesn't like slapped.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, that's us on the half hour. We got something to finish with?
I think we're reversing to the creeping right-wing coup in the UK, and the approach to the pandemic. Apparently, the civil service bosses are threatening their minions. They've got to come into the office. You can't work from home. They're putting pressure on to force people into the office and catch COVID.
That could be interesting, because if it does fire up a spread of COVID within the civil service, can you imagine?
That could prove disastrous for Boris, because it's a cert that the trade unions will fight against this. You know what I mean? You'll get the CSU, you'll get every trade union saying, hold it. You've asked people to go back to work and they ain't doing it. So why are you forcing civil servants back to work at this point?
But as far as I'm concerned, it's why they're ending the furlough scheme in October. That's their leverage. You can't eat unless you go back to the office.
Aye.
So
I think it's an easy win for them in the sense that they will be able to force a considerable amount of people back to work. But as you say, if something goes wrong within the civil service, if there's a couple of outbreaks in big offices, there'll be hell to pay in the press.
Well, and they do have big offices in the civil service, don't they?
Yeah, very big offices. The other thing that struck me was this is the new divide between the haves and have-nots. Those that have can sit at home on the internet and do their job. Those that have not, the cleaners, the bus drivers, the people that have to go into work are the ones that are at risk. And it's the usual class thing. Who suffers? It's the poor what suffers.
Isn't it noticeable that all of the press, and I mean all of them, even some of the friendly press, were useful at times in this. It's a long time since anybody's told us how many bus drivers or cleaners or NHS staff have caught COVID and died. They just stopped printing stories.
Your own profession, taxi drivers.
Mm-hmm.
Aye.
We were getting a weekly league table of who was getting infected at one point, weren't we? What were the most dangerous jobs? That's all stopped. I wonder why.
So I fully
Very good
expect
question, Jimmy.
somebody to steal that particular one, and we'll see something on Monday about it. Because we seem to have been quite good at jumping the gun on some of these things.
Aye.
To the press.
Well, if that's the case, then if somebody wants to steal this one, please do. Has anybody seen or spotted Effie Deans of late? Is she still going round? Is she still going round a roundabout somewhere in the Highlands trying to find her way to Fort William?
Oh, by the way, the original name for Fort William is Inverlochy.
Inverlochy.
The River Lochy comes in.
All right.
It's Inverlochy.
Well, that would have definitely confused me.
Well, and Garrison, or whatever it is the garrison. That's where it got the name Fort William.
All right.
And that's what confused her, because it doesn't say Fort or William or anything close to that on the sign. And Effie wanted to complain about that, because Effie is...
Well, what got me about that whole thing was, if it's in English and Gaelic, what's the problem? Does she not read English?
It's too confusing. That's the problem. There's too much information on the signs as she drives towards them.
Right. And she lives in Edinburgh. I wonder how she ever got out of Edinburgh in the first place.
Aye.
If there's too much information.
How on earth does she get past the roundabouts on the way out? Aye.
That must be very difficult for her if she goes to Sheriff Hall.
There's been a lovely wee play on Twitter with people putting Fort William and Gaelic in various places. I've seen it as the Hollywood sign, and also welcome to the fabulous Angarasa. Love it. Good
stuff. Well, an unusual Saturday for us boys. I believe you're away hill walking, Stuart.
Not a big one, but I'm going for a hill, yes. It's a nice day for it.
And Jimmy, are you going to sit in your backside and watch the racing or something?
I'm going to watch a bit of racing, and then maybe go for a small libation this evening.
Well, I'm hoping there's some rugby on. With all that in mind, thanks, Stuart Lockhead. Thank you, Jimmy Hutton. I'm Norris Stewart. Thanks for listening, folks, to this possibly one-off. I don't know, if Saturdays turn out like this regular, it might become regular. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, boys. Can we handle it?
No. In a word, no.
Okay. Thanks for listening, folks. Cheers for now. Oh, wait a minute. I can't turn it off.